What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another market update. As usual, let's get straight to the charts. So, not much has been happening lately over the past few weeks. Bitcoin has just been consolidating after this devastating dump over here. And we now have to see what direction Bitcoin will choose next. One thing's for sure, however, the sentiment is getting worse and worse, and it really looks like smart money wants you to sell all of your Bitcoin. Sure, there is some downside possibility at these current levels because the current bottom power law support 60% deviation level is at like $54,000 or so. So there is some potential to the downside, and obviously we could wick even slightly below that. But the value is already really good at these levels, and selling here would be very stupid. Currently, Bitcoin is still building a consolidation pattern here after this massive volatility. It does look somewhat like a symmetrical triangle, but don't put too much faith into this, because even though this could potentially be a little bit bearish because the previous move was to the downside, so this could be somewhat of a continuation pattern, it could also do the unexpected and break to the upside before moving back down, if we're going to move back down at all. I still have my long position open. Remember, it's just a small position and with 1x leverage because I am ready for a potential DCA ladder to even lower levels if that's what it comes down to. But right now that trade is in a little bit of profit because my entry was pretty much exactly $66,000. The idea here is to build up a high confidence position during the bear market bottom where the risk to reward ratio really favors the bulls. So right now the power law fitting is telling us that we are one line away from the potential bottom area. And this is obviously way better value than when we were at that median power law area. It is unfortunate that we never were able to break above it, like in the previous cycles, but there are many unusual things about this cycle. Now let's look at our other charts and indicators to find some more clarity, starting with the DXY versus Bitcoin. So as you can see, the dollar is still kind of consolidating here, but slowly moving to the downside. And Bitcoin is obviously dumping with the dollar. And this is something that has happened occasionally, even though broadly speaking, they do have a very strong inverse correlation. So as mentioned in some previous videos, this is an example over here where the end of the bear market here kind of correlated with the dump of the dollar, the actual bottom of the dollar. But for most of the cycle, you can see that the inverse correlation holds. But if this weakness in the dollar continues, I do think that Bitcoin will eventually catch up to this fact and will pump accordingly. If not this cycle, then maybe in the next one, but we'll have to see. In the long term, the devaluation of the dollar is obviously inevitable, especially if the United States wants to service its debts. When looking at the unemployment rate, you can see that it has actually been cooling down here lately, even though we're kinda in an uptrend here. And this is good news, obviously, because this is pushing us further away from a potential recession, because if we were to go above 5%, that's where the danger would really be. The federal funds rate is coming down slowly and predictably in this staircase pattern as well. We're only going to have to see whether we're going to get some sort of recession this cycle like we typically do during these cutting cycles. The good thing is that inflation remains at pretty low and sustainable rates here, and this really means that the Fed doesn't have much of a justification for keeping interest rates high. Combined with the very strong M2 money supply, the macroeconomic conditions really are not that bearish right now. So this is obviously all good news for Bitcoin. So other than some short-term uncertainty here due to another war started in order to distract from the Epstein files, things are not really that bearish when it comes to macroeconomic conditions. It's all becoming so tiresome. Don't get me wrong, Iran's supreme leader was a real piece of crap, and Iran in general is in such a terrible state. I hope they can become somewhat of a normal country again in the future. But still, this is not the way to solve things, obviously, by having these forever wars. So even though there is some short-term fear here due to the price action and some war fears, there really isn't much in terms of fundamentals to imply that Bitcoin is going to die or something. So this begs the question, why are we getting this type of content all the time lately? This is what I've been seeing. Bitcoin is dead, it has failed as a project, it no longer has a vision, etc. This video encapsulates most of these criticisms, so I'm going to summarize those for you. I'm not going to play the video because of potential copyright reasons, but I'm going to try to be impartial and see if these arguments hold any weight. And obviously, if you want to watch the video, you can just look it up. So the first argument here is that Bitcoin is not a real store of value because look how terribly it has performed against gold here over the past few months. And for Bitcoin to have such high transaction fees, it really needs to perform well, right? But this is a very flawed argument for pretty obvious reasons. It's pretty disingenuous to show a gold versus Bitcoin chart when gold finally caught up to inflation and had its first rally in decades, while Bitcoin has performed like this against gold over the past 15 years or so. The next argument is that Bitcoin and crypto in general was a solution waiting for a problem and that problem never came. This is complete nonsense. Obviously, the main problem Bitcoin tackles is inflation, and it tackles that problem really well. Not to mention all the other benefits that are arguably as important, such as being able to take control over your own financial future, being able to self-custody your own money, being able to transfer money even if you live in a horrible country, and so on. Now, his counter-argument is that most Bitcoin and crypto trading is being done on centralized exchanges, which kind of defeats crypto's initial purpose. This is true to a certain degree, but it's also disingenuous because I believe that people should have the ability to trade wherever they want. If currently the market demand favors centralized exchanges, then so be it. Maybe we need a few more bankruptcies before people start figuring things out. But decentralized exchanges do exist, and we're getting more and more options. The next argument is that there's going to be some big crypto bailout now, and that's a big gotcha moment for Bitcoiners because that's exactly what Bitcoin was designed to circumvent after the 2008 financial crisis when banks got bailed out. I don't think there's going to be any bailout, and even if there is, then that would obviously just be rich people exercising their power, not something that Bitcoiners actually want. There is absolutely zero need for a bailout. Bitcoin will do just fine. The next argument is that Bitcoin lacks any clear narrative or purpose now because Bitcoiners got everything they ever wanted. This is not true either because even though we do have a crypto-friendly administration in the United States and we have a couple of exceptions like El Salvador, the reality of the situation is that the vast majority of the world is still very much fiat-based and Bitcoin is not legal tender pretty much anywhere. We may be living in our Bitcoin bubble, but the vast majority of the world still has no idea about Bitcoin, why it's important, what the mission of Bitcoin is, why everybody should own some, why people should store their savings in Bitcoin. So the potential to expand is still absolutely there. Ask 10 average Joes on the street what they think about Bitcoin and you'll have your answer. Obviously, Bitcoin's rate of growth will never be the same, but this is easily predicted by the power law. This is something we know anyway. The rate of growth is slowing down as the network matures. So maybe in 10 or 15 years, Bitcoin may 10, 15, maybe 20x instead of going up thousands of times. The next argument is that online gambling is the hip thing to do nowadays amongst Zoomers. And why not gamble? Why even bother with crypto? This is a completely ridiculous argument. In fact, I've always thought the opposite. I've always thought, why do people gamble if investing and trading exists? At least your chances of winning with investing or trading are way higher compared to gambling, at least if you choose the correct asset and do your research. Gambling has always existed alongside Bitcoin and it will continue to exist. The video then makes a similar argument about AI and how all the money is flowing into AI now. This is completely true, but at the same time, I do think that this is a bubble, whereas Bitcoin's growth is a long-term trend. The final argument is that Bitcoin has no purpose because people just want to buy low and sell high, and people don't care about the fundamentals of Bitcoin. It's true that most Bitcoin investors just want to make money, but at the same time, that's the case with every asset. The author of the video fails to realize that true Bitcoiners, people who actually understand Bitcoin, don't just want to sell Bitcoin. They want to accumulate as much of it as possible and leave it for their family and descendants, and only sell a little bit every now and then when needed. The idea is to hold a certain percentage of the global money supply. So whenever you see a concentration of articles and videos like this, that's when you know that we're getting close to the bottom. In fact, we're seeing a bit of a cluster right now. Back to the charts. So some of you know that I sold all of my gold and silver recently, even though it was a very small percentage of my overall portfolio. I still stand by that decision, even though gold is still holding up relatively well right now. Silver is also consolidating right now, but honestly, this looks like complacency. So we're gonna have to see whether this was just a huge bubble that's gonna correct for a while now. Bitcoin is still really undervalued against metals, so in my opinion, the smart play is not to buy precious metals right now. The crypto fear and greed index is still at extreme fear. We're at 14, so I do think that a bounce is inevitable, especially considering that we're close to historical lows. I think people are underestimating the importance of this historical cluster of price action in the 60s and 70s. I think it's going to play a pretty important role. Now, if we're going to get some sort of bounce, I do think that we're going to get some resistance in the 74 to 75k region, because that was the previous bottom range. I'm going to continue accumulating as much Bitcoin as I possibly can. You can get twice as much Bitcoin as you could for the same amount of dollars up here. So obviously the value potential is amazing. Keep your heads up, guys, and join our free Telegram group. It's completely free to join, and I post there all the time. This is Saverio speaking, and as always, thanks for watching.